Hey guys, welcome back, 1776 or Bust. So today we're going to do kind of a final overview of the M&P 2.0 shield with the Optic Ready version here. Now this is your 4-inch. I've done already the preview of this and I've already shot it. So I'm going to kind of go through what I found. Now I am no stranger to Smith & Wesson, nor am I any stranger to the shields. I've owned several shields. I had a 4-inch before this one. However, I wanted to get the Optic version because, again, I'm not really that great of a shot with the optics. And I felt that the shield does fit that way, especially with the 4-inch. You have that long slide. So it made a little more sense to get it in this kind of model as opposed to, like, let's say a 43X with the Optic version. So after shooting it, I came up with some things that I thought were good and some things that were inherently bad. Now, when I say bad, use it with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that the gun isn't worth buying. I mean, overall, I do think the shield is a very, very, very good handgun. And I do think it's worth a look if you've never had one or if you've been looking for one. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, the biggest argument or complaint that people are going to have is the capacity. Capacity is an issue, especially when we're looking at some of the new firearms that have come out that are a lot smaller. You've got your Hellcat, your SIG. You have guns that have a lot of capacity in a very small form factor. The shield, while it really hasn't changed much through the years, is still a pretty small handgun, but the capacity is usually what people will argue is the worst part of the handgun. Now, I'm not going to say it's good or bad. I think it's fine. I know that there were some people who said, well, if you're in a situation where there's 87 people and you only have 15 rounds, does that really put you at a disadvantage? I would argue that if you have to have a fight with 87 people, you probably shouldn't be in that fight anyway because you are ill prepared for that. So I think you have to take that with a grain of salt. Again, there are some people who say, absolutely not. I want 15 rounds as a minimum, and this just doesn't meet that requirement. And if you're one of those people, fine. More power to you if that's what you prefer, but I still think the shield is very viable, even if it comes with an 8-round magazine and, of course, the 6-round magazine. Now, you have plenty of options out there if you want to get mag extensions, mag guts, whatever it is that you want to do to maximize that. Although it may extend the size of the grip, which kind of defeats the purpose of the handgun in the first place. And honestly, I think that from the perspective of what this gun was, and when it came out, and the fact that it was a very small package, meaning that it was easy to carry, easy to conceal, and it could get the job done. Now you fast forward a few years, and you have these micro compacts that have come out and just blown the waters out of everything in regards to the capacity, and that's a huge, huge bonus for those two smaller firearms that I mentioned before. Now, overall, what's the shooting experience? And I think that's obviously the most important feature of this handgun. The shooting experience on shields, even without the 4 inches, are very positive. They're very good shooting experiences. They tend to shoot like a bigger firearm, which is always, always good. You don't have to worry about blowing off your thumb. You don't have to worry about control necessarily because the gun weighs a pretty good amount for such a small package, or at least it does feel that way. It is definitely, you can feel that weight in the slide of the handgun, but it definitely makes a difference, especially when you have the 4-inch slide on here. Now, I would say that the positives, great shooting firearm, shoots fairly flat, not a lot of felt recoil, which is a good thing. All of the functions on the handgun, slide locking back, putting the slide into battery, the trigger, everything worked fine. The trigger is always a bone of contention because I just can't stand that hinge on that trigger, as you guys can see right there. I really wish that they'd move away from that because I think sometimes that's what people kind of, I think, complain a little bit about just the way that hinge is. Now, some people like that articulation on the trigger there. I'm just not one of those people. I do have an Apex trigger. I just haven't installed it because I wanted to get a good shooting impression without that trigger on here. And I mean, overall, the trigger wasn't bad. It was pretty decent, and the gun is safety checked. You can see here that you have a little bit of take up right about there before you hit the wall, and then a pretty good break. I mean, the reset is right there. It's nothing to write home about. It is not very tactile, still not very audible. I know it's a performance center shield, but again, that seems to be the bane or I guess the Achilles heel of the Smith & Wesson line. You just don't feel that good solid reset. And I have yet to find that in any Smith that I've owned, but that's just something that I found. Now, the biggest complaint I have about this particular firearm isn't the gun itself. It's actually going to be the red dot that's on top of here. Now, the side picture is very good. The fiber optics on here do a great job. They're very visible in the daylight. Even in some darker environment, you can still pick them up pretty well as long as there's a little bit of ambient lighting in the room. But the one thing that I definitely noticed while shooting this handgun was the red dot just doesn't get bright enough. And I didn't notice if it was walking. I really couldn't attribute to that, probably more in my shooting if it was. But at the same time, the biggest complaint I have is that the red dot just isn't very bright. And it is supposed to self-dim and I guess self-brighten depending on the environment you're in. And I was in a fairly dim lit firing range. You know, the camera makes it look brighter than it is because I do some lighting adjustments on the editing. But at the same time, the dot didn't seem to get very bright. And I would say that's probably the biggest flaw of the firearm. Now, is there an option to remove this red dot and put something aftermarket on? I'm still investigating that. I'm not exactly 100% sure. If any of you know that answer out there, please leave those comments down below. You know, I think overall, when I look at the Shield was a very, very excellent firearm, and the Shield still is an excellent firearm. I think, however, it does need a little bit of a refreshing, and I think if they were able to do that with added capacity in the magazines, it would kind of just give it a little bit more of a revival in the gun community. Although I already know there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are very familiar with this firearm, who love this firearm, and would take no other choice because they've had nothing but great experiences with the gun. Again, super reliable, no issues with it, no issues with anything locking up or not doing something it's not supposed to. So I think overall, performance-wise, it's a great handgun. It is something that I would definitely recommend. Price-wise, not very good either. You know, Smith & Wesson tends to be one of the cheaper striker-fired handguns on the market. However, with this red dot, they upped the price, and I think it's a little expensive. I mean, these are retailing probably around, I want to say like $900. I could be off on that, guys, so just bear with me on that. But, you know, MSRP is always higher. You can get it on the market, but right now we're living in such crazy times that's going to be hard to find these for the cheap. Normally, you're looking at 800 plus, which, you know, for a Shield is very expensive. I think the Performance Center stuff isn't necessarily a big deal. You know, you get the fiber optics on there, but I don't really feel like there's any real major improvement from a Performance Center shield to a basic shield. I don't think there's a better trigger. I don't think anything's been polished or cleaned up any better than any other shield. And I always tend to drop an aftermarket trigger in it anyway. So, you know, again, take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt because these are just my own personal experiences with the gun. Overall, though, it's still a complete package. It's a great shooter. It functions perfectly and flawlessly. And I think overall you'd be happy with the firearm as long as you can get past the capacity issue. And you don't necessarily need to buy it with the red dot. You can get it without that. And I think if you went that route, it'd probably be a better value because I just don't think the red dot itself really adds to the value of the firearm. And again, that's just my opinion. So if you don't mind, leave those comments down below. If you don't mind also, give us a thumbs up. I always appreciate that because it does help with the algorithms on YouTube, or at least that's what everybody talks about. So leave those comments down below. Tell me what you think about the Shield, if it's still a viable option, if it is something that you would use, and if not, why has it kind of taken a back seat to some of the other firearms that you carry? So I hope you have a great night. Stay safe, and as always, everyone, freedom is never free.